Hey everyone, it's Ben from Last Resort Network. Today we got a great video for you. I'm going to go over my vinyl record collection. I've been collecting vinyls for a while, probably since end of high school to the beginning of college. My wife, when we were dating, got me a record player as I think my first birthday gift as we were dating, which was pretty cool. And so it's always very memorable. And my collection has grown slowly over time. It hasn't been growing super fast as money doesn't grow on trees. And vinyl records, it's hard to find good deals on them because new they're pretty expensive, and the old used ones, even if you go to thrift stores or antique stores or things like that, people know that they're worth money because people are collecting them. So I've kind of gone at a slow, steady pace. I really do love music. I can't say I always take advantage of listening to music on record players. Actually, I mean, it's easy enough listening to it on Spotify. But anyway, I'll get started with the first album. I'm going in alphabetical order-ish. I'm not, if the band has the in front of it, I'm not going to include the. I guess that's just the way I wanted to do it. So the first album is the 1975's Self-Titled. And this is a double album by vinyl standards. And this was a very important album to me as I was getting into music, and I believe that reflects in the fact that I got it as a high school graduation gift from two of my friends, one of which you'll also see on this network. And this has some of the 1975's classic songs. It was their first one after they got big from their EPs. Of course, it has Chocolate. That was one that was on repeat for me in high school. Hard Out, Robbers, Girls, She Way Out. I mean, The City. I mean, it's just got all of the classic 1975 stuff. I think, as their career has progressed, they've kind of fallen down or maybe a little out of favor for me, but I do like returning to them from time to time. So this is a good album to have, I would say. Next, the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. Now, this album is an all-time favorite of mine. As you can see, just one record on this one. It's a short, sweet, but I would say it's a perfect album. I mean, Wouldn't It Be Nice? Do You Still Believe in Me? That's Not Me. I'm Waiting for the Day. Sloop John V. God Only Knows. I mean, it's basically hit after hit on this album. This was sort of the Beach Boys' response to the Beatles, and it's the only album that I'm aware of that they made that was really like it. And I would say, based on the other albums I've listened to, this is probably their best album by a wide margin. Brian Wilson obviously had a huge hand in molding this thing together. And it's incredible. It's definitely in my top 10 to 20 albums. It fluctuates depending on the day, but it's incredible. It's a really, really good album. It never gets old. I like listening to it over and over again. I got this at Gower Records in London. I was in London and I was looking, at records store, I was just happened to be in, and I was like, this would be awesome to get an album and bring it back, across the sea to the US. And I got a very American band, the Beach Boys, so I didn't think about that at the time, because I kind of lump them in with the Beatles. So speaking of the Beatles, the next album is Abbey Road. Nothing can be said that hasn't already been said about Abbey Road. I mean, starts out with Come Together. You got some of the weirder tracks with Maxwell Silver Hammer and Octopus Garden. And then, I Want You, She's So Heavy is so good. And, you got Here Comes the Sun. I will say, like with this album as compared to Pet Sounds, and maybe even some of the other Beatles albums, there's some tracks that just don't hit me as hard, or I even looking on here and I'd be like, I don't remember them as well. Doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. It's just I haven't connected with them as much. So Abbey Road, probably not my favorite Beatles album. I would probably give that to Rubber Soul, which is an interesting selection, but I think in terms of like front to back playability, Rubber Soul is my favorite. But Abbey Road is certainly up there and a really, really solid album. Of course, iconic album title. All right, next, another one of my favorites, The Stranger by Billy Joel. This album I bought at a antique store, and I thought, like I was saying, sometimes the prices on these antique, used records feel like are a little bit expensive. This one I felt like was reasonable. Still got it in the sleeve to protect it. This is another one of those, top 30, 40 albums, in my opinion, that is just front to back so incredible. Especially like the first 6 songs are really, really good. Really remember, you know, The Stranger, Just the Way You Are, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, and then Vienna, of course. And I think Moving Out is a really good opening track. So this record, I love Billy Joel, but I think, you know, this one stands out as my favorite of his. And if they got the nice, you know, Italian restaurant in the back. It's cool. It's awesome. You know, Billy Joel, he's still going strong. This one I'll count as being in my collection because we received it as a wedding gift, but it was more so given to my wife, whose name is Emma. But I really do love this album, so I wanted to highlight it for a second. It's For Emma Forever Ago by Bon Iver. Skinny Love from this album, you know, really created the hype for Bon Iver in terms of a mainstream audience. It's not quite as experimental as some of his later stuff, like 22 a Million, but it's really solid. And of course, there's the story of him. I think this is the album where he like went to a cabin in the woods, and you know, that's a cool story. So an album I revisit from time to time, and Pitchfork recommends it, so you have to like it. Next up, Carole King's Tapestry. This album, again, I found it at a record store, and this is probably the cheapest album I've ever bought. It was like $7 or $8 because it's fairly used, but it plays really well, and it's got sort of this like, yeah, the tapestry in the middle, some cool art, all the lyrics featured on the back. I mean, Carole King, she came onto the scene as a songwriter. Initially was just seen as that, and finally was able to make an album. She made Tapestry, and some of her most well-known songs are on this. I Feel the Earth Move, So Far Away, It's Too Late. You've Got a Friend, of course, is a classic at weddings. People have covered many of these songs too, so you might not realize that this is all Carole King. I mean, I think a few other people wrote the songs with her, but I mean, her songwriting talent is incredible, and these are just great songs. Yeah, it ends with You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, and then Where You Lead, which was, yeah, you know, theme song for a TV show. It's just very memorable. It's like, it's hard to find artists who are like this in modern times. I don't want to sound like I'm one of those people who only appreciates old music, but just snappy, like, it's efficient. Every song makes you, you know, hold on to the artist, and it makes you like them a little bit more. It shows a little bit of diversity, but also is very consistent. It's not like a concept album or anything crazy like that, but it's just very, very solid. So I will always tell people about Carole King's Tapestry. It's a great album. No list would be complete without Jeff Buckley's Grace. This is my all-time favorite album. Actually, was just recently gifted this, which is awesome because it is my favorite album of all time. I think Jeff Buckley, may he rest in peace, of course, died in a tragic accident in the Mississippi River, but he left this with us, and it's incredible. You know, from Mojo Pin, the opening track, to Dream Brother, the ending track, to everything in the middle. Of course, Lover, You Should Have Come Over. It's probably one of my favorite songs of all time. People will recognize, you know, anyone, even if you haven't heard of Jeff Buckley, would recognize his cover of Hallelujah more than likely from hearing it from somewhere. It's way more famous than the original, you know, Leonard Cohen rendition. Not to say that that version's bad. It's just Jeff Buckley's voice and the gift that he was given with that is just incredible. So it's interesting because I like a lot of different styles of music, but this kind of like singer-songwriter who leaned into a little bit of alternative rock, but was, you know, sounds like a classically trained vocalist. This ends up being my favorite record of all time, but it really is just something that I find myself returning to time and time again. And I think when I realized the album was more than just the two hit songs, and I started listening to some of the other songs like Last Goodbye and So Real and Eternal Life, you know, that's when I started being like, wow, this album, you know, Mojo Pin, this album is just, it's unbelievable. So can't recommend it more highly. All right, this one I'm excited to talk about. So Zach actually recently gifted this to me as a wedding gift. It took a while to get here because it came from Japan, but this is Merzbow's Pulse Demon. This is unlike any album you could possibly ever listen to. Now, it's got the records in here in like little packages, and it has this, you know, weird looking. This is like some sort of special edition, so I think the album art's a little bit different, only slightly. It's got 4 sides, and of course we got the classics like Woodpecker #1, Woodpecker #2, you know, Tokyo Times 10, Worms, Plastic, Earthbound. So you might be thinking like, what is this? Like, who is Merzbow? What is he about? Well, it's noise. There's no really better way to put it. It's like knobs turning. It's static. It's I think like close to an hour, or maybe over an hour, maybe more like an hour and 13 minutes of just, you know, an onslaught of noise. If you're into noise rock, this will push you to the farthest extent possible. And he's done it over and over again. But this is his most well-known project. So regardless of how you feel about this, I think it's worth at least checking out Woodpecker #1 and trying to see, you know, what you get out of it. It's definitely way different than everything else that I have in my collection. So I'd consider this a grail. It's pretty awesome. Nirvana's Bleach. I got this at a record store. I love Nirvana. I went through a really, you know, big Nirvana phase, as many people do. I don't know that their Unplugged album is probably my favorite. Like, and maybe like Nevermind would be like the one I think is the most consistent. But I do love Bleach, especially a lot of the opening tracks. You know, the Blue, Floyd the Barber. Of course, love the Andy Griffith reference there. About a Girl. I think About a Girl is my favorite Nirvana song. So you know, there's some like heavier ones on here too that they kind of get away from. Maybe they return to a little bit with stuff like Aneurysm, but like Negative Creep and Love Buzz, like those songs are awesome. I would say, yeah, I'm not as familiar with the second half of the album. Like, I probably need to return to it a little bit more, but a lot of really good tracks on Bleach. Really good debut from Nirvana. Here was my second purchase in London, and that is the Stone Roses self-titled album. Also a top 20 album for me. I can't remember how I was recommended to listen to the Stone Roses. This was definitely like late high school when I was really getting into music and searching for stuff that was like new to me, that I had never heard. And the Stone Roses somehow came up, and the first track, I Want to Be Adored, which is their most famous, was the one I listened to first and was like, wow, this is really good. Listened to the album a couple times, and then slowly, like, the other tracks started to catch. As this happens a lot, it was a lot of the first couple. So, you know, She Bangs the Drum, Waterfall came next. Those are amazing songs. But then I think over the last year, and when I was in London, I was listening to this album a lot when I was like running in London and stuff. Shoot You Down, you know, This Is the One, I'm the Resurrection, Song for My Sugar Spun Sister, Made of Stone. Like, the back half of the album really stuck out to me as like being really good. I think particularly I Am the Resurrection is a song. It's very long, it's anthemic, it feels like a complete and a perfect like closer to the album that starts with something that's also a little bit, it's more inquisitive. But I Want to Be Adored is a really good opener. It's an interesting opener. It's also an interesting song for a band to be like its hit, because it is a little bit, it's longer, but it's repetitive and catchy, but maybe not as catchy as like Waterfall or She Bangs the Drum. So but I Want to Be Adored is the one that people remember. This band kind of, I wouldn't say they did fall off after this, and it's unfortunate, but this album was so important to the music that came after, like Oasis and Britpop and Blur and all that stuff. So I would say that, like, I think their career is a resounding success, regardless of what you think of anything that came out after this album. And finally, a band I will never get tired of talking about, Talking Heads. Maybe my favorite band of all time. They really came on strong at the end of 2023 is when I started really listening to Talking Heads. And I mean, like, outside of Psycho Killer and maybe Once in a Lifetime, you know, like, I'd heard those songs. I knew Talking Heads was like a big band. I knew that people talked about them, but I really got into them, especially the first couple albums that they made. And I think their best studio album is Remain in Light, as many people think. Their best album overall might be the concert album, Stop Making Sense, which really, I mean, cemented how much I was into this band. When I saw like the joy that they exuded live, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And they were so unique in themselves, and David Byrne is such an interesting person, and the songs are so, you know, almost like angular in a way, and like in this album was obviously influenced by like Afrobeat, and it would, you know, Into Speaking in Tongues was influenced by that. So they weren't afraid to like pull in other elements outside of their kind of like frenetic start, which was kind of like post-punk, you know, new wave type thing, where, you know, the CBGB stuff, and then like they evolved into something different. Now later on in their career, as happens with many bands, I think, you know, don't think I've even listened to some of the albums in the back half of their career. You know, David Byrne was trying to make movies and do different things, and that's all well and good, but this album, you know, is just, it's incredible. And especially the first three or four songs, you know, with Cross-Eyed and Painless, Born Under Punches, and Once in a Lifetime, you know, those three songs, if your band can make those, I mean, it's incredible. And then there's lots of other good songs on this too. So if you want to listen to something very, very unique, you know, I think Brian Eno, I'm pretty sure, was involved in this too. But love Talking Heads, love this album. It's a great way to end the collection. I actually don't know how many albums that was, so I'll have to keep track, but it wasn't a ton. So maybe in a couple years I'll have an even more interesting video to make. But thanks for tuning in to Last Resort Network. This has been Ben.